been having such a blast with photo scanning this past month. If you look around, almost everything in this scene, except for like the background sci-fi stuff, is all photo scan things I actually grabbed from around my town. And it's just the level of texture that you can get, like the different the layers of. I woke up early and I went down to scan a bunch of stuff that's normally underwater, but it was really low tide, so I was able to get all of these bits that are like covered in barnacles and stuff, and like trying to hand texture that would have been crazy. Or even just like projection mapping, there's all this little like naturalistic bits where the concrete is eaten away, and I'm absolutely loving that entire workflow. I'm still going to work on a video where I talk about the different benefits, or the benefits of doing scans with your phone or your camera, and the best ways to go about that I've found. I started overthinking it and it turned into just a big lecture, so I want to give that approach a little bit more love. So today I just want to talk about how to turn scans into actual easy to use assets, because if you've ever done scanning, you might know that just because you've scanned something doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to work with. We're going to talk about how to normalize the lighting maybe a little bit, and how to get the poly count down, how to maybe I'll show you. Full disclosure, I actually spent all day yesterday already making this tutorial showing how to clean up this object here, except that the scan was already really good to begin with, so I kept doing like, and now we can do a smoothing pass, and it didn't look any better, and I just had to be like, trust me, a lot of times this is useful. So I think maybe I'll take a different approach today. So yeah, I've got all of these old like World War I, World War II military forts around where I live, and so I've been going off there on cloudy days and just trying to get nice little scans of that old architecture that I can use, and I'm just kind of trying to create a Lego kit so I can easily bash stuff together. It's been really nice for making environments for this Interplexa scene that I'm working on. Just kind of kit bashing a little bit, but one thing is that like most cement structures are built into the ground, like a retaining wall, something like this. I was only able to scan this front bit right here, but I wanted it to have some solidity, so I didn't have to, if I wanted to use it, I didn't always have to figure out how to embed it in a hill, and so I added this top bit, which well, we'll get into. There's a lot of unexpected complications sometimes when it comes to stuff like this. Oh, geez, yeah. I learned a lot doing doing all of this stuff. Also about like how I did this half in reality capture, which taught me a lot. There's special ways if like something gets unaligned, you can go in and actually just get your hands dirty with the original images and hand line up the points to give it more data to get a cleaner scan. Whereas if you're using like a Polycam, which is just an app on my phone, which I think is still only for Apple, but I think it's a sign of the next generation of technology that's going to be probably hitting everywhere really quick here. You don't get any real control to piece anything together if the reconstruction fails. That said, I'm yet to have a reconstruction fail. Yeah, but. Yeah, here are some of these scans I got the other day when I was down at the low tide, which I like. Also, of course, I'm making all these for an asset that I'll be sharing here. I hope that you guys find them useful. But let's see. Should I just talk about baking first? I feel like I should. Dang, what's the best way to go about this? I have a bunch of different techniques that I want to talk about, but they don't particularly fit into a linear flow. So I'm like, should I just jump all over? I'll just jump all over. So just because you have a scan doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to work with, and I really like normalizing them, figuring out the orientation and cleaning them all up so you can just slip them around and they all kind of blend into each other really easily, especially for natural stuff. And so let's go through how maybe we go about that. Right here I've just imported my raw scan, and you can see I walked in a circle, kind of just scanning this area. Which means everything outside that circle, some of it reconstructed from when I was walking over here, but it's kind of skewed, and if you go into the wireframe, you can see that, most of the density is right here, so that's the stuff we want to keep. We're going to clean this up real quick with booleans, so I'm going to create a cube, scale it up, and just kind of place it right under there, and I'm going to try to just rotate this so that it looks as if it's more or less balanced. You can see right here, we're losing the middle instead of the edges, and we actually want to keep the middle. So I'm going to pull this down even more. Tab into edit mode, and first, at least with with Polycam like stuff, it comes in chunks sometimes, and so you can like select everything and it does that. So just hit A, M, and we're going to merge by distance. So any points that are right on top of each other are just going to be merged into the same point, and now we can grab the whole thing. So first I'm going to hit Alt-Z, go in X-ray mode, and I'm going to select kind of just the bit that I think I want to keep here with the circle select tool. Turn on proportional editing, and that lets me just, move things with the fall off, which is really, really handy for working with Photoscan stuff, because you've just got so many vertices here, you can't grab them all one at a time, and this lets you kind of massage stuff a little bit. I'm going to be using the word massage probably too much today. Let's see, how does this look? Yeah, that already looks pretty good. Sometimes if like the middle accidentally is intersecting or something, I'll just grab one of those vertices and pull it back up like that, or if we have a little bit more than we want over here, I'll grab one of these bits and pull it down like that. But this works pretty good. So let's do a Boolean. Under the modifiers tab, I'm going to create a Boolean modifier and select, basically we've just modeled the negative space that we want for this pile. So we're going to select that negative space, woof, and tell it, all right, you're going to use the difference between these two. Wherever the cube is, get rid of this, the mesh from the original pile, and it's already done that. They added this new default option for Booleans, which is exact, and especially if you have a really big scan, it can be really intensive. Sometimes I'll change it to fast just so that it won't bog things down. Also, sometimes exact is buggy, and fast actually works better, and so if you ever get a result you're not happy with, change it to fast. Also, if you ever get an error, make sure all of your normals are recalculated. Select your mesh and hit Shift-N to recalculate to make sure that everything's facing outside, otherwise it doesn't know what side you want to keep of the mesh. But yeah, once you got that, we'll just apply it, delete the original cube, and I'm actually going to do this and hit Control-L to select all the linked vertices here, and hit Control-I to select inverse, and then go X, delete vertices. And in this case, that doesn't actually help much, but in a lot of times, especially if you have a really complicated scene, you only want to keep like the person in the middle, not all the trash around them, and so that's an easy way of cleaning that up. But yeah, look at this. Now we can just stick it all over, and because we've kind of normalized the height and all of that, everything will just kind of play nice. I do have one recommendation, and that is, you can see the yellow dot in the center here. That's the origin, and if we rotate the object, it rotates around that yellow dot, and if we scale, it scales away from that yellow dot. I like to place it, I'm going to just move all of the geometry around the yellow dot so it's just above the bottom of the rocks, and that way, like if you have it like this, when you scale, everything lifts up. This way, everything scales mostly just outwards, so if you have, a setup like this, you can scale things and it'll still just blend really nice with everything else, just a thing. And this actually works pretty good, especially for wide views, but if we add some high contrast lighting here, you can see that like it gets pretty angular pretty quick, and there's a few things we can do to kind of mix that up. First, if we just add any sort of bump map, like I'm just going to drag the original image texture in the node editor here down into the normals, and we have to make it go through a bump map here, and we're going to say, hey, these values are now a height map, which means the white bits are going to be, higher, and the dark bits are going to be a little bit lower applied over the whole thing. And it's, if we turn the distance down to like 0.1 and turn the strength way down, you can see it breaks up that jaggedness really quick, which is kind of useful. Also, if we just right click and shade smooth, we don't even really need to do that. I think this adds a lot in a lot of cases, especially if you do have a rough scene like barnacles or wood or something like that. However, at least the Polycam app, and my assumption is most apps in the future generate a baked down normal map, which contains a little bit more of that finer detail that the mesh maybe skips over. And so I'm just going to load that in. Shift A, texture, image texture, let's open the normal map here, and I'm going to plug that into the normal instead of the bump map, but we do have to tell it it's a normal map by going through this normal map node. And we got to change the color space to non-color. And now look at that here. If we turn the strength off and on, you can see it just has a lot of the information from of the rocks in there. And so a lot of times I don't like adding multiple high-res texture maps to a single asset, because I feel like it's an easy way to bog down the RAM when you're rendering, and have Blender be like, oh, there's too many giant high-res textures. Especially if like each one of these is 4K, then that's just a lot of data for one rock element. But in this case, it really does make the make the asset, doesn't it? Like that's so much better than poof. I grabbed a scan of a grocery store the other day when nobody was around except for one lady who looked at me weirdly. And yeah, playing around with the normal map there, it's like, it just helps you preserve the bananas, you know? And that's all I ever wanted. Alright, so I've got this sky hayride through the sky, and Nathan Vegdahl and I went out the other day to go on a random Photoscan quest, and we tried to get into a couple. I've got military stuff all around where I live, and there's these cool military museums that have these like big tanks and giant guns. Like that. Ooh, I know. We'll scan those, and then we'll break them apart into like little kit bash stuff and make big mechs, and it'll look really fun. Except we kept trying to drive through checkpoints, and men with guns were like, "No, you go this way," and we end up at a road covered in barbed wire, and we're like, ah, and so we ended up just scanning a bunch of stuff on the beach again. However, we did scan this tractor, and I was looking at that, and I kind of, you saw it. Turned it into this thing, and then last night I was accosted Nathan as he was coming out from shaving his beard, and I was like, Nathan, don't shave your beard. We can use those for tracking points. But I just grabbed this guy, and so maybe we'll talk about how to clean up something like this. So yeah, I just absolutely love being able to just hop up and grab stuff. It's finally, like, I know I'm harping on this a lot, but it's finally the thing that I was wanting. Like, I just want to be able to grab real life like clip art and slam it into the computer and put stuff together like this. Also, this isn't Eevee. This is Blender 3.0 with Cycles X, which it's just, look at that. This is so fast. Like, I am running a 3090, which is, very fast, but like, this is a whole different thing. I keep thinking I'm an Eevee, and it's like, nope, it's path tracing just in real time. Wow, wow, wow. However, it is still a little bit buggy. Like, if I try to save any images out of Blender 3.0 using denoising, they all just save as black, and so even though it renders like 3-4 times faster on a lot of shots I'm working on, it saves it as black, and so I have to render it without denoising, which kind of negates a lot of the benefits at this point. But they warn you, you shouldn't actually be working on this with anything you really care about, because it can corrupt stuff. I'm kind of taking a gamble. Okay, so here is that raw scan of Nathan, and one thing that's nice is I think a lot of these apps actually will give you your model at scale, which is rad. I really do want to talk a lot more about like the difference between apps and kind of the DSLR reality capture workflow and all of that. They both have kind of different pros and cons. But I think I really want to dig into that in a deeper video next week. So this is again just cleanup. So first I'm going to do that same thing we did with the booleans. Create the cube. I'm trying to separate him from the rest of the mesh, so I'm not trying to get rid of all of this as much as I'm just trying to clean up his feet here. And let's actually go into material preview mode, and I'm gonna grab some of these extra little bits, because I don't just want to keep raising the cube until all that stuff disappears, because I'll be cutting off a lot of his shoe. So I'm gonna actually lower it down and bring all of it down using proportional editing here. So just grab that, turn on proportional editing, and scroll. If you scroll up and down, it changes the area of influence. You guys know proportional editing, probably, yeah? Looks like that front toe is always going to be a little bit weird, but okay. Same thing with this foot. And I'm going to go into edit mode on this cube here, subdivide it a few times. Let's see here. I want to just get rid of this stool. Come up under his butt like this, and just kind of try to, let's see, follow the contours of how this is working. We're going to be, any model where somebody's sitting, they're going to be sitting when you use them in the scene, so I'm not particularly worried about getting this part particularly clean, but I still want to keep as much usable data as I can. Yeah, that's working pretty good. And let's try to get this bit right here where he's holding on to the stool. Just gonna, again, focus more on his hands than anything. Cool. And let's slip this here in the middle. And I'm gonna pull this face out and rotate it to match. Same with this one. All right, one thing, you don't want any of these faces intersecting, because then its idea of what's inside and what's outside and what you want to keep, what you don't want to keep, gets all messed up, and it can slam things into weirdness. But here, let's grab Nathan here, go into the Boolean modifier, just like we did before. We select the ground, and that seems, you can see if it's working just because the outline of him will shift, so it's just around the bits that you want. I'm going to apply it, delete that Boolean, tab in edit mode, select him, and like I was talking about earlier, oh, actually he's all one piece. Okay, that's good. Control I to select the inverse, and X, delete those vertices just to get it all smooth, and that's looking pretty good. So if we look at him, he is a little bumpy, and we have a few different things we can do to change that. Sculpting mode is really cool and very powerful. Like if we just turn the strength down, but the radius way up, you can see like it. If we go into solid view too, it just smooths everything up. And a lot of this is obviously about trade-offs. You're losing the fine details in exchange for, you know, overall smoothness. If you find yourself in a position where you're covering the whole thing with the smooth brush, I would actually recommend just go into edit mode, select everything, and hit Control V and go smooth vertices maybe once or twice, and you can see that smooths everything out really good. Like you can see this scan here, this is actually a pretty good scan, but just some bits like her arm or whatever and her legs are all jagged. So if we just tab in and yeah, do that, smooth vertices a couple times, and everything like just looks a lot better. And then you can go in with the smooth brush or the sculpt brush and actually smooth out some of these bits. Smoothing tends to make everything kind of skinny. Yeah, let's actually turn up the strength, turn down the radius just to, yeah. So a lot of times I'll do that, and then I'll go back in with the inflate brush and just pump the arm back up, you know, and maybe give her some big, yeah, this is, oh, hey, Caitlin. Wow. Oh no. All right, but yeah, that actually mostly worked for here. There's this hanging gap between his arm and his torso that I could either use sculpting or I can just use proportional editing to drag that kind of bit just back up a little bit. Like we'll never see it. I'm not particularly worried about it. Yeah, there we go. Okay. What if we've got a little messed up bit? And again, this is this is a pretty good starting scan, so it's not going to be the best example. But let's say we don't like his hair in front of his face like that. Well, if we go into texture painting here, I love the clone tool. The clone tool lets you take bits from one place and put it somewhere else. It uses the 3D cursor as the source. So if we shift right click to set the 3D cursor right there on his pocket, if we start painting somewhere else, it's just using that bit, you know, painting over there, which is rad. Unfortunately, it does use the perspective that you're looking at it from, so if we're like, oh, well, now let's put a zipper right here, it's just painting this same view right here. That's how that works. So what I usually end up doing is actually kind of silly, but I'll have, well, let's say we want to get rid of this, this emo hair right here. I'm going to, in edit mode, duplicate him, flip him, and oh, we got proportional editing on. I'm gonna scale him like this, and I'm just gonna use this one on the right as my palette, effectively. So let's go into texture paint. So now I can use, let's see, I'm just gonna line it up right on his pupil. And line up on the pupil here, hopefully. And oh no, it's not. That's not working. That's not working at all. The reason is because when I flipped it horizontally, I probably flipped the normals. So now every face intrinsically has an orientation that it's pointing in, and that's how it knows which, if you want it, you know, if you're selecting the inside or the outside, or when it's doing booleans, what you want to keep and not keep. And you can actually see a visualization of that under this pull down here, face orientation. You can see blue means it's facing outside, red means it's facing inside. So when I select here, it's actually selecting the outwards facing one now is on the inside of the back of his head. So, but we can fix that by selecting these and hitting Shift N, and that recalculates it. So now, if here, let's turn this overlay off. Now if we do this, Actually, I'm glad that happened. It's because we went SX1, scaled it backwards. We basically flipped everything by -1 to get the mirror image, but that also flipped the orientation of the normals. But now, hopefully, that means now we can. Woo! And we're playing a dangerous game right now because this could very easily look pretty weird, but it appears to have worked really well. One thing you can see is that we still have the geometry from the hair right here, so I might just turn the strength down, but just smooth that a little bit. Actually, let's talk a little bit more about smoothing. You can see right here, the way it smooths is actually, it's by massaging and kind of pressing down and flattening all of these triangles here. But it takes with it the geometry, or the texture. UV'd at it, which is why his eye is now ridiculous. And there's a few ways we can get around that. Like a lot of times, especially if it's clothing or something that kind of has some intrinsic randomness to it anyways, it doesn't matter if you over smooth because it's warping all of the textures, but that doesn't really matter. However, if you've got something like a straight line on a wall and you're trying to smooth it out, you can, even if it's a really subtle bump that you're trying to get rid of, it'll still twist everything. And we can fix that either with baking, which we'll get to at the end, or there's... Oh, whoa, okay, yeah, more about that in a second. Sorry, I just figured out why this was resulting all weird. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna smooth that out. That's probably enough, and just do the same thing. There we go. That fixes it up just a little bit better. It looks like I still have a little bit of a protrusion here from where the hair was, but you can see how you can fix it. I'm gonna line up the right angles with the world here. Control A, apply rotation. And let's say, all right, so we've got this pump here, but we've got all of these jaggeds and stuff on what should be a flat surface. And this is another one of those situations where it's like, why do I really need this many points to define the shape of what's effectively just like a cube? And again, we will get to that. But if we go into material previews, sculpt, smooth, and we start to smooth things out, it's smoothing. Oh. You can see that shearing there. Here, let's hit M, merge by distance. That will fix that. Yeah, you can see when we start to smooth things out, it's twisting everything in a way that isn't great. There's also flatten, which will look at the surrounding angles of everything. Here, let's go into solid view, and just kind of try to normalize all of them, and that works a lot better for smoothing things out, like hard surface modeling stuff, because it's not trying to push everything. It's just kind of trying to bring everything in, which means there's less outwards distortion. Here, I'll show you on this side too. That works a lot better. And if you want to be even more precise, you can see it's along the y-axis here. Under the brush settings, instead of using area plane, we can just say, hey, flatten it along the y-plane, and now it will only flatten things on that 90-degree angle, which is really, really handy for flattening things up. And like if you're trying to flatten some corners and things like this, you can do that, and then you can get the Z-plane. Whoa, that's too strong, but you get the idea. Another quick way to do this, you can do a lot of this with proportional editing too, and there's a lot of times where that's really handy. I'm just going to select these faces here on the side, turn on proportional editing, and hit SX to scale things, you know. We're basically just flattening it, but I'm going to turn down the influence, so it's just the stuff right around there. SX0, flatten everything completely, and now it's totally flat. Just another nice way to be able to clean stuff up. And there are tutorials way better than anything I'm saying right now that can tell you about how to use the sculpting tools. Like I think multi-plane scrape is probably really good for trying to clean up, you know, right angles like this. Right angles are particularly hard, I feel, for reconstruction. But let's get back into it. One thing that's a little bit of a bummer for Photoscans is that their generated textures and UVs, since they're made by a machine, are pretty wacky here. And also, it uses up most of the space, which means, like, right here, this is new butt geometry that we generated when we got rid of the old stool. And you might think, like, oh, okay, well, that's great. We'll just texture paint in, like, some of his pants or whatever and clean that up, except that, like, you have to look at where... This just is randomly here now. This doesn't have a place to go on this map, and so if you're lucky, you can just find some place like this to put it, and sometimes that'll work. But if you want to generate new texture locations for that, I'll show you how to do that in a second here. Actually, this is working pretty good. And pardon me, Nathan, but I'll just try to clean up some of that a little bit. And yeah, that's pretty good. Important though. You have to save this image if you want to keep those changes. Save. There we go. Although I think oh no, okay, well that's that's probably fine. Okay, so baking, you probably, well, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I was afraid of baking, and so I avoided it for 15 years, because I was like, why would I want to bake the lighting onto an object? Then if I ever change the lighting in the scene, I'd have to like rebake it. That sounds like a pain. Or people being like, yeah, but you can bake down all the normal so it's nice and low poly, so you have a low poly thing. I'm like, if I already have the model, why would I want to waste a bunch of time making like a low poly version of the model? But we can automate a lot of that, and there's a lot of reasons you'd want. Well, we'll get into that. I'm going to show you first just baking, because it's ludicrously easy. So we have Nathan here. Here's his material. Here's his node setup. I'm going to hit Shift A and create a new image texture. This is going to be our new texture. We're going to call this new Nathan sitting with. This is another one of those trade-offs. Like, you can have it be a nice small texture, but then it isn't as much data. This, to me, for background people, tends to work. I don't know if this matters, but I'm unchecking alpha. And whatever's selected in the node editor is going to be what's baked to. So I'm just going to select that new texture here. In fact, we can see it if we open up the image editor. New Nathan sitting. You can see right now it's just black. If we go into the rendered view here, let's turn up the ambient light, and here we've got our sun hitting him. I'm going to go into cycles. Great, so we have Nathan selected, we have, you know, the destination texture selected, we go down to bake, and we can just hit bake, and it just is doing it. Pow! And up here you can see our new texture. It's in here now. If we plug it straight into the surface settings, it's just using those straight values, and so it's actually ignoring all of the lighting now. We can turn off all of the lighting, and he's just gonna sit there glowing. So right now you're thinking, wow, Ian, that's amazing. You just made it so we can't change the light angle anymore on Nathan for some reason. How is that better? And it isn't at all. However, so Nate Taylor and I made this big light that's in the workshop for photo scanning stuff, and it provides enough light, but it is also very directional. All of the lighting is very top heavy, and I put down a white sheet on the ground to try to bounce some of that light back up, but it's not doing nearly as much. So everything I scan always has this very top heavy lighting to it. What would happen if we set up a light underneath the photo scan, shining up at the model, and then baked that? Would that kind of equalize it? The answer is yes, kind of. Let's do that. So first I want reference for what the original scan looks like. So I'm going to duplicate Nathan here, and I'm going to click right now. That means this shows two objects are using the same material. I'm going to make it single user so that I can just plug the original texture. That's here. I'll get rid of the generated one. I'm going to plug just the original texture here straight into the surface. So this will just show what the flat, raw values are. It doesn't care about lighting or anything like that. And the one on the right is going to be the one that we're actually like working on, the de-lighting. It's still using that texture. I made it as an example. I'm gonna delete that. This is the original texture going into here. Let's make this a diffuse. And this will make more sense in a second if it isn't right now. So right now it's using the diffuse lighting from the scene. And what I want to do is turn the color or the strength down on the ambient lighting until the ambient lighting on him mostly matches the original texture there on the left. And so this is looking pretty close to me. All right. So now I'm just gonna set up a light underneath him, an area light, flip it so it's aiming up. Increase the size here, and maybe set the power to like 33. What is that? What is that? Is that doing anything? I guess we crank it up a lot. And right now the change is pretty subtle, and that's good. It's better to under delight than over delight. But I'll show you an example in a second where it's really useful, especially for like architecture stuff. But okay, so we've got this, but we've still got areas of occlusion here, like in the under the arms and all of that. If we hit Shift A, let's use an input ambient occlusion node, and if we Control Shift click on this, you can see that the occluded areas, the shadowed areas, the areas that are blocked from light, are actually here now as node data, which is really cool. And if we plug this through a color ramp, we can kind of dial in the the contrast of it. So I've got the diffuse shader right here. I'm also going to add an emission shader. I'm going to plug that same thing in there, mix them together. So right now I can toggle between diffuse and emission. And again, they should look pretty much the same because I've set up this lighting to match the original texture pretty well. But if we turn up the emission, now the emission is brighter. Let's plug this ambient occlusion node into the mix factor, so where there are shadowed bits, it's using the emission shader. And now look at that. Now all of a sudden all these areas under the arm are quite a bit lighter. So this is without. We can just boost it just a little bit here. And actually, again, this is kind of overdoing it and not the best example, but I'd probably just keep it at like 2. But yeah, with all of this done, now I'm going to go in and create my image texture, and I'm going to load in new Nathan Sitting, select him, go down, and I'm going to bake that. And the reason this is important is because in real life, light is just bouncing around, everywhere. And you have an area like this where, under my arm, light is more likely to be blocked as it gets there. So you get kind of that dark shadowed area. And if you do a scan of that and then put that into another path tracer in the computer, you're going to have that same thing happen again, where the light is less likely to get under the arm. And so you're going to have an arm shadow that's twice as dark as it should be, which is why this delighting process is important. So all right, we've got this new texture here. I'm going to plug it into a diffuse, and that into this. So all of this was basically just set up. And let's do the same with our original texture here. Plug it through a diffuse as well. Oh, okay. I was very confused because this texture still had the baked-in sun lamp, and I'm like, there is no sun. What is going on here? Once Blender makes the assembles the shaders, it's not usually referencing the image texture anymore, so it doesn't actually know that we have now replaced this texture. Which means, let's see, can I just go to solid view and rebuild? Yes, okay, now that sunlight's gone. That's good to know. Okay, so we have this one going into a diffuse, and we have this one going through a diffuse. Gonna load in an environment. All right, and here we go. You can see the one on the left is the original, and all the shadowed bits are maybe just twice as dark as they should be, whereas the one on the right, especially when you kind of see it from a distance, just feels a lot more integrated into the scene. And there's ways to do this process a lot better. And Nathan's actually working on something really clever right now, where you take an HDRI at the location where you do the photo scan, and you use that to power the delighting process. You get a location-specific, super accurate normalization of the lighting. He's working on some stuff right now that is kind of blowing my mind in terms of color workflow stuff. We'll talk more about it later. It's ludicrously exciting. Oh, and oh yeah, this is like what most of my scans started out looking like with these big cement assets. I did so much cleanup, but you can see here just the result of that double occluded lighting. Like we had the original occlusion from the scan, but then we have also with the path tracer, just no light is hitting the inside of here twice. And so normalizing it by plugging this into an emission shader, having a maybe brighter emission shader here, mixing them together with that ambient occlusion node. We're gonna dial that in a little bit with the color ramp. Just have the inside be nice and dark. I'm gonna turn the distance up and turn this color ramp way down, so it's mostly just affecting this area here on the inside. And so now the black areas are using this top emission shader, and the white areas are using this bottom one. Actually, let's do no delighting on more of this. Yeah. If we turn up the strength of this emission, we're just lightening the shadows in here. So now we're working with this as opposed to that. And so if we bake this, and because we're only using emission shaders here, it's ignoring all of this other lighting going on outside, which is kind of useful for eliminating variables. But yeah, that also means we can just say bake type emit and hit bake, and plug that into a diffuse here. Suddenly we're working with this instead of, and look at the shadows, that. That said, okay, we're just getting started. Let's try to clean this piece up just a little bit more. This is kind of a tricky one. I'm just gonna try to straighten it out a little bit, and let's do our usual thing with the Boolean cubes. And it's looking a little better, but some of this stuff is weird, so let's do it in texture mode now. All right, and now we've got something a little bit better here. Let's try to reconstruct some of this data. I'm gonna alt-click on this row here. Sometimes you have to hold down Shift to get, add in little more segments to it. But in this case, it kind of worked right off the bat. I'm gonna hit F to turn that into a face. This isn't great topology-wise, but it's good for getting the job done. I'm gonna grab just one of these points here at the very end and drag it down, and this will be our new wall here. And in fact, I'm going to use the knife tool just to add a few more kind of points here, maybe kind of a loose grid across this, because this is kind of a wonky shape. That said, if you really hate n-gons, there are ways around that I'll touch on in a second here. And maybe you're thinking like, all right, well, this would be cool. We'll texture this by just using this texture right here. And so you open up the UV map and you go, oh, wow, okay, let's hit U, unwrap this new stuff we did, but even still, like, you have to try to find a tiny little bit somewhere that works, because this is all jumbled up. And so you go, okay, well then maybe we won't try doing that at all. So you go into texture paint, clone tool, and you shift right click to set your source. But when you start to paint over your destination, you very quickly realize that you're painting over everything else, because this wall doesn't have a place on the UV map here, so you're just painting right over everything else. And in a case like this, you could just give it new coordinates, because it has, there's this little black area you could use up here, and you could be like, hey, great, it all works. But let's say you wanted to add some thickness, like to this wall right here. Now let's just Alt-Shift-Click on some of these edges. Hit E to extrude them all backwards like this. I'm gonna hit F to make it a face, and then maybe I'll just use the knife tool to add a little bit more geometry right up here. Pow! So that now I have a point that I can cleanly drag down. And here, maybe I'll use Control R to add an edge loop here, and bevel that out. Just give a little top to that wall. And let's add a roof to this also. Cool. Control B to bevel here. Let's select these top faces, hit I to insert, E to extrude them down, maybe select Alt-click on this top loop, Control B to bevel that too, and like, we wouldn't have enough space for all of this new stuff on this gobbledygook. So what are we gonna do? How are we gonna make some new space? How are we gonna be able to texture paint and do all of the stuff we want to do? Well, it turns out baking lets you bake to a new UV map, which is so handy, actually. Right now, this is the UV map that came with the Photoscan. It's this one right here, and it's the one that's used by default. If you only have one UV map, you don't even have to specify it with your image textures. It's just assuming that a UV map with this selected is plugged into there. But you can use another one. So let's add that second one. This will be our new hotness. Yes. And I'm going to create a new baking destination here, the same way we have been. New 4,000, our new hotness. And to tell the bake to use our new hotness UV map, we just have to plug in, that our new hotness into the thing here. However, we have not yet generated the new hotness. You can see right now everything is still overlapping. So I'm just gonna select everything and hit U, Smart UV Project. Let Blender do it. I'm gonna change the angle limit. That's how hard of a crease there is in the geometry before Blender's like, sure, I'll just treat that as its own separate UV island. You can play with that. There's lots of ways you can optimize the layouts of all of the UVs and everything. I'm not particularly worried about it, but there's probably really good tools and tutorials out there if you really do. But here are our new coordinates. You can see we've got a nice big spot for our roof up here, and we've got all of our new wall segments and all of that in here. It's really nice. So let's bake this texture to these new UV coordinates. I'm gonna change the diffuse to an emission just so that we're ignoring all of the lighting in the scene. An emission value with a strength of 1 is basically just the raw values of the image. And I should talk a little bit more about that at some point. But yeah, all right, so I've got my object selected. I have my new texture selected. Under the bake settings, we're set to emit, so we're gonna be rendering the emission values. And let's click bake, see what happens. And look at that, it's following our new UV map here. This is great. And now if we wanted to, we could just grab things like this roof here, and here's like that cement floor on the inside. We can just say like, hey, use that. And oh wait, it's not. It's still using the old setup here. I'll plug this in, and now the roof is just using that same floor texture, which is cool. Or we could grab these pieces and slip them here if we wanted to, which is kind of cool. But we don't want to do that because we just created all of this new cool like UV coordinate stuff. So let's actually take advantage of that. I'm gonna do the same thing I did with Nathan, where I'm gonna duplicate this whole thing, rotate it 90 degrees. This is going to be our paint canvas effectively. So when I go into texture paint, shift right click on this, and start to paint down here, we're just getting our new texture. Pretty cool for seams like this. Here, maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit, turn down the radius, and just get this all going. You can be as sloppy or as fastidious, as painstaking as you would like. Here we go. And also, if you wanted, like, you can see where the UV maps are here. You could bring this into Photoshop and just paint your own stuff in there, or overlay your own images in Photoshop in the correct places. And that's actually probably a pretty good idea. Cool. So I'm gonna make this go through a diffuse shader here. And look at that, that's looking quite a bit better than how we started. And you can see we didn't even mess around with the with smoothing stuff out. Although this is another pretty good example here of if we did want to smooth this out. Sculpt mode, smooth. It immediately starts to warble everything up so much. So it's a lot smoother, but it's almost unusable, kind of twisty spaghetti-wise. And so wouldn't it be cool if we could smooth this stuff out without it also warping all of the UV coordinates? Well, this leads us to the final and possibly coolest bit about baking. So yeah, this is where to me it gets very cool. So we have right here this nice little cement slab that I scanned, but it has 30,000 faces in it, as opposed to this cube which has 6. And I know most of them is like, you know, the grass and all of that, but I'm making a point. But let's do our usual little thing here. Actually, I'm gonna use this cube for the Boolean. Pull that down. Actually, I'm gonna go kind of like this and just grab these couple places in the corner till they're out of the way. Cool. And now do our Boolean operation here. Great, I'm gonna apply that. I just did that because I have the bool tool enabled, which lets you do Boolean operations with just some basic hotkeys. And that once again gives us, you know, this new piece of geometry that doesn't really have anywhere on the UV map. Although, look at how weirdly this is set up. That said, this will work out pretty good because I can just, in this case, come stick this right here, and we've got a pretty good. Yeah, that's a nice little setup right there. So baking will do this crazy thing where it will work based off of proximity, which seems kind of magical to me. But if we create a cube here, have it just kind of line up with this original box, we can bake from one to the other. Actually, here, let's Control B, bevel it just a little bit here. So for this white one, I'm going to create a new material. This will be our you know, new cement. Onto the shader editor, we'll use our usual thing, image texture here. And under the UV editor, you can see it's just a usual, you know, cubic layout. We'll go back to the shader editor, make sure that new cement is selected. We select the high-res version, shift-click on the low-res version, and under the baking settings here, you can see that there's an option, selected to active. And that's gonna go from the high-res one to the low-res one. I think I wanna talk about cages in a second here too, but let's just see if this works right off the bat. Combined, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do emit, which means I'm gonna go into the high-res version here and just go change that to an emission shader. Ignore all of the lighting. All right, high-res, shift-click onto the low-res, bake. And all right, let's see what happened here. Here's our new texture. If I plug it in, we got our new one, but look at that, it's only 100 faces as opposed to 30,000 faces, and it looks basically identical. That's pretty nifty. Sometimes you want to help guide the texture from the high-res version to the low-res version, and you do that with something called a cage. And I'm actually just going to duplicate the low-res version. Here, let's name it to, you know, cage. And if you hit Alt-S in edit mode, it's going to move each face outwards along its normal, which is that inherent direction each face has that I was talking about earlier. I'm going to move it outwards until it is outside of all of the high-res geometry, and that's basically just going to create a, you know, a way for it to, it's the direction. It now knows, all right, this face and that face, this face and that face are connected, and it gives it all a direction. I'm gonna hide it so it doesn't get in the way, but then under the baking settings, and I apologize that we don't actually have to do this, but it is still a good idea, we select cage, pick our cage. Now when we bake from the high res to the low res, it will be even more precise. So look at that. That is nifty. This is a thing that I've I don't know why it took me so long to ever bother learning that. It's pretty friggin' cool. Of course, there are a lot of other ways to decrease the amount of geometry in a model. Here, let's work on these guys. This will just be for reference. I'm gonna select this, and under the modifiers panel, I'm gonna add a decimate. And we get to pick how much of the original geometry we want to use. You can see originally it is 10,000 faces. But if we turn this down, you can see it's actually, like, the stuff's slipping all over as different, you know, vertices go missing. But it holds together really well. So here's, it's only using, like, 300 of the original 10,000 faces. And in a lot of cases, we could kind of get by with that. But it can also do it even smarter if we go over to planar. And this says anything below the 5 degrees is going to be merged into like one flat object geometry-wise. So if we change this to, like, I don't know, let's say like 50 degrees, it's going to merge. It keeps the shape, but it merges all of those flat faces together. Of course, it's doing that without any regards to the texture underneath, so we can tell it to keep UVs in mind. And now it's reducing the number of faces without also, you know, shearing everything all up. And if we apply this, you can see, because this was flat, it basically just got rid of all of this data here and all of this data here. And this is pretty darn cool. However, if you ever want to go in and like clean up or work with the data afterwards, this is so messed up topology-wise. This is pretty wild, but still a really nice way to quickly clean things up, especially if it's like a hard surface model or something like that. There's also remeshing, which can give you pretty good topology. Here's this new one. I'm going to go down to remesh. Blocks is really fun if you've never played with this one for converting something in, you know, Minecraft or like a sci-fi thing, especially if you use like a wireframe modifier on it or something like that. We did that in Tears of Steel quite a bit. But let's go to smooth, and you can see it just makes a whole new model based off of this. It doesn't care about the texture coordinates or anything like that. But here, let's maybe go up to like 6, and we could do, yeah, let's do sharp. But yeah, then you can just bake from the high res to the low res, cleaned up one like we were doing before. So with all of that in mind, let's go back to this piece here. I'm going to duplicate it, and let's see if we can clean this up a little bit. Sculpting. And then I'm gonna hit it with a decimate. Let's just drag this down until it just, like, yeah, that's probably fine. I'm going to apply that, and actually I'm gonna get rid of all this existing texture stuff. This will be our final texture. And here, I'll delete this, create our new image texture. And at this point, we've rebaked this texture like 4 times. So, and if there's any sort of generation loss, we'd be suffering from that right now. So try to do more steps combined than just, you know, baking it over and over and over. But final image, yeah. I'm also going to just use the default UV here just to minimize confusion. Select all of this, hit U, Smart UV Project, and maybe, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that looks good to me. So that's what this will be using down here. We want to make sure it's using our new hotness. Yes, in fact, let's just delete this other one so it isn't even a question. I have the copy attributes add-on activated. You can activate it in the preference, which lets me just select these and hit Control-C, copy location, so now they're in the exact same spot. We'll make sure the high-res one is using an emission shader. Great, and so select the high-res, shift-click to select the low-res. That's selected. They'll go down to bake, check selected to active, and I found out in like the 5 minutes since I made this that if you turn up this number, it simulates hand creating the cage, and so we don't even have to worry about that anymore. That's fantastic, and hopefully everything should just work if I hit bake. Let's find out. And that's looking pretty good to me. So we've got our high-res one, we've got our low-res one, which still needs to be connected. Here, let's stick it through a diffuse here. Except one is a lot cleaner and flatter and low-res.
Hey, look at the Hotel California. Just look at it, yeah. Just look at it. Look at that, it's the Hotel California. Yes, it is. It's a hotel in California. Look at it.
So I think you can kind of see you get out of it what you put into it. Like there's a lot more love I could give these pieces. Like I could go in and texture paint up this kind of stretched edge here, or I could even use the original images that I took as a texture source, so I could work off of something even more direct and high res. But hopefully you learned something useful. I sure did over the past couple weeks. I am really excited to be able to kind of wrangle and bake stuff a bit more effectively. Anyways, I will talk to you later. Peace.